The trial of Kyle Rittenhouse has been big national news, and as America anxiously awaits the jury's verdicts, there are still five lessons that we can already draw from this trial and the events that led up to it. Let's talk about those lessons for America's gun owners in just 1 minute. Hey folks, I'm Mark and welcome to the Four Boxes Diner. Kyle Rittenhouse is the 18-year-old who's being tried for shooting three men during the anti-police riots in Kenosha, Wisconsin in 2020. Prosecutors have charged Rittenhouse with murder and attempted murder, but Rittenhouse says he's acted in self-defense, fearing for his life, which is why he said he shot the three men. So what is the first big takeaway from the Rittenhouse case for gun owners? And that is, I hate to say this, but I think it's true, gun rights opponents, those are the anti-gunners out there, have scored a big win in this situation regardless of the outcome of the Rittenhouse case. If you look at what the Rittenhouse case has taught us, it's that Kyle Rittenhouse, the man himself, has endured terrible trials and tribulations, and I'm sure great stress from going through this process. Rittenhouse has had his life turned upside down for over a year. He's had the specter of going to prison for life hanging over his head. He's even had the Joe Biden White House basically condemn him as recently as last week, okay? And for the rest of his life, no matter what happens at the trial, tens of millions of Americans will believe the mainstream misinformations and lies about him, including that supposedly he's a white supremacist, which I've never seen evidence of, by the way. So even if Rittenhouse is acquitted, right, which I think he should be, but even if he's acquitted, he still effectively has lost because of what he's had to endure going through this process. And ask yourself this, what impact will Rittenhouse's experience have on law-abiding armed citizens such as you and me? Well, in my view, and this is critical, in my view, it's going to have a chilling effect on certain people's willingness to exercise their right to keep and bear arms and to defend their communities. I mean, we've all seen this, right? You've seen the way Rittenhouse has had his name dragged through the mud all across the country, and you've seen all the time and the money that he and his family have spent defending this case and dealing with this matter. And after this trial, how many people will think twice about defending their neighbor's property or their community? How many will decide not to exercise their Second Amendment rights for fear of being subjected to a lawsuit or a criminal prosecution where they may have to go to jail and lose all of their civil rights because of it? Now, this chilling effect is really a major win for the anti-gunners as I see it. And we, as gun owners in the United States, must take action to educate the public in order to stand up for their rights and to oppose attempts to render the people defenseless, whether it be because of the denial of the ability to have guns, the ability to carry guns, or the ability to use them when appropriate. Here's the second thing we know about the Rittenhouse case. That is that Kyle Rittenhouse was just one of many ordinary citizens who stepped up to try to defend Kenosha from riots. In doing so, these people were taking part in a long tradition in American life. That's right, the right to defend your community from, among other things, mob violence. That right is constitutionally protected, and now it's in grave danger in this country. I want you to think for a moment about what happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Why was it that Rittenhouse and many others defended the community and chose to defend the community and the property that were essential to the community's well-being, to the market town that serviced all of the surrounding areas, right? And it's because by the time that Rittenhouse actually went to Kenosha, where his father lived, the city had already endured 2 days of riots. And even though many of the police were working hard to stop it, the riots were just in too many places, in too many spots, that even as the police tried to stop it, I didn't think they realistically could do so because there were too many problems and not enough police. This is not unusual in policing in America. Now again, the supposedly peaceful protests had already burned several businesses to the ground in Kenosha. There were also looting going on in those stores, and local governing officials were not stopping it, either by choice or more likely just because they did not have the capacity to actually accomplish that mission. Now this is why citizens like Kyle Rittenhouse stepped up into the breach. Now you may be wondering, Mark, hey Mark, what do you mean there's a long tradition of citizens defending their community with arms? We're not familiar with that. Well, I'm just going to tell you one story from the founding era. The reason why the founding era is so important in this country is because it helps us understand what the Constitution means, including what the Second Amendment's right to keep and bear arms protects and codifies. So I'm going to tell you a story of one of America's greatest founding fathers. The story takes place in 1765. That's 1765, a decade before the American Revolution begins. In that year, the British Parliament levied the hated Stamp Act on the colonists. Americans were in an uproar about this taxation without representation. And so a mob descended on the house of a prominent American who was rumored, without proof, but rumored to have been involved in passing the Stamp Act that the Americans so hated. That prominent figure, you've heard of him. His name was Benjamin Franklin, one of the greatest founding fathers. But you see that at the time, Benjamin Franklin was stationed in London, England. That's where he was. He wasn't in the American colonies. So when the mob decided to tear down Ben Franklin's home, guess what happened? Well, Franklin wasn't there, but Ben Franklin's wife was at home, by herself, in fact, at that moment in time. And what did Ben Franklin's wife do when she heard about the mob and its intent? She sent word to her friends and to her neighbors to come defend the home with firearms. And guess what happened, folks? They did that. Through that show of force and those firearms, Ben Franklin's wife and her friends and neighbors were able to disperse the mob. And Franklin himself was understandably proud of his wife. Who wouldn't be? And he was grateful to his friends. But in today's America, in some blue states, in some blue jurisdictions, you're not even allowed to carry a firearm outside of your home. And even where you can, you'll probably be demonized if you use those firearms for self-defense by many in the media. And you may even be prosecuted by a local district attorney who may be more concerned about playing to the mob than about justice and following the law. Now, no matter what the verdict is in the Kyle Rittenhouse case now, the tradition of community self-defense, in my view, will be forever tarnished in many Americans' minds and placed at great risk because people will be worried to engage in it for fear of becoming the next Kyle Rittenhouse. Now, the third takeaway is this. When you're thinking about your Second Amendment rights, it matters a lot of where you live, where you are, where you walk, where you work. You see, if you're in a blue state or even just a blue locality or a blue locality within a red state, let's say, you are at a greater risk of having your rights taken away from you than in many other jurisdictions in the country. And it's very important, and I think this is one of the lessons of the Rittenhouse case. It's important to understand for all of us that the decisions as to whether or not you're charged for a crime are often, if not always, made at the local level. It's the local district attorney, the local prosecutors who decide, by and large, whether to bring criminal charges or not, whether to present your case to a grand jury or not. It's not usually the police that make this decision. It's the prosecutors that decide whether or not to charge you, and if so, what to prosecute and how to charge you with what crimes. So you can be in a state that has a very friendly series of gun laws and even a gun culture, a place like Wisconsin, but you still may find yourself in the wrong side or on the wrong side of a hostile, politically motivated district attorney or prosecutor's office. I think Wisconsin is a prime example of this. Wisconsin has pretty good laws on the right to carry guns. It has pretty good laws on the use of deadly force in justified self-defense. But Kyle Rittenhouse was still charged and prosecuted under what I consider to be mostly an invented narrative, right? A story, if you will, that would seem to mock these very laws. Bear in mind that Rittenhouse was charged with the crimes that he's been accused of essentially in a matter of hours after they occurred, which is highly unusual because in most situations where you have a homicide or any kind of a serious crime, there's usually a period for investigation that takes place first, and only after that investigation completes itself, guess what happens? And they decide to charge or not, okay? But in this case, there was like an immediately charge against Kyle Rittenhouse literally within hours after the shootings. Wonder why? You tell me. Here's the fourth thing we know. The specter of continued mob violence may be influencing or may have influenced the actual trial of Kyle Rittenhouse. We will never know for sure, but we may know for sure, but right now we don't know for sure. But keep in mind that during the voir dire, now voir dire is just a fancy couple words that means how do you, the selection of a jury. Now during voir dire, when the lawyers were asking questions of prospective jurors to figure out whether or not they should be on the jury or not, one of the prospective jurors said this, quote, "I really don't want to serve on this jury. I mean, either way this goes, you're going to have half the country upset with you." I'm not shocked. I bet that's one jury said it, prospective jurors said it. I bet all the jurors are kind of thinking along those lines. I know what's something I would be thinking about if I was asked to serve on a jury in Kenosha in the Rittenhouse case. It's only logical you would ask that question or think about it. Now, of course, we also have to look at what's going on today in Kenosha during the jury deliberations. Downtown Kenosha is boarded up, right? I'm guessing the members of the Rittenhouse jury likely know this quite well, and they know because they probably drive by the boarded up buildings. Okay, there's stories now that schools that are near the courthouse are now moving to online learning because they're not going to go to school because of what might happen at the courthouse or near the courthouse. We also know that the members of the Rittenhouse jury likely know that if they vote to acquit in favor of Kyle Rittenhouse, there's a good chance that there would be more mob violence. On the other hand, the juries know that if they convict Rittenhouse, law-abiding supporters of the Second Amendment probably are not going to burn down the city. Right? That's not generally speaking what constitutionally minded Americans do. We know this because there was a major gun rights protest with something like 20,000 people or so in Virginia in 2020 protesting gun control legislation being contemplated. And not only did those gun rights protesters engage in perfectly fine, no law, illegal behavior or anything, they actually picked up the trash as they left. So I don't think you're going to have any mob violence from the Second Amendment community if Rittenhouse is convicted. And I wonder whether or not the jury is thinking down the board a little bit as they contemplate. They shouldn't, but they're human just like the rest of us, and they have thoughts just like the rest of us. And I'm sure they're working hard to do a good job. But hey, they're people too with a lot of thoughts and emotions. And again, what is the story with this story that broke earlier today involving an NBC or MSNBC reporter or freelancer that was apparently following the jury's bus? Why are you following the jury bus? Like, what's the point, right? Why would you do that? I mean, I assume that maybe down the road we'll find out why he was doing it or she was doing it. But I'm guessing you follow the jury bus because you're curious where the jurors live. Maybe you want to take their photographs for later. Maybe you want to publicize their photos if they don't acquit. I don't know. Or do you follow the jurors home because you just want to let them know that the media is watching them? I don't know. But it looks like something here, to me, it has the perception and the look and the feel of something that could be a form of jury intimidation, possibly. Whether it's intended or not, it certainly seems that dynamic has the potential to have a real effect on these judicial proceedings. And from Kyle Rittenhouse's point of view, I would think it's kind of dangerous because I would think the intimidation factor would be more towards trying to convict him than trying to acquit him. Finally, here's the fifth lesson from the Rittenhouse case. The mainstream media will demonize people who successfully exercise their right to self-defense against mobs and criminals. From day one, the mainstream media branded Kyle Rittenhouse, among other things, like a white supremacist, even though, again, I've never seen evidence of that. They did so even though there was no really support for this outrageous charge. I haven't seen it. No, nobody else has really been able to see this, but I can tell they've called Kyle Rittenhouse a vigilante, even though by my definition of vigilantism, which means basically you go out and seek revenge on someone that's committed a crime, even though you're not a state actor, you take it upon yourself to punish people that have committed a crime. Certainly I haven't seen any evidence of that Kyle Rittenhouse did anything along those lines. We know that Joe Biden's White House has repeatedly made comments that are somewhat nasty against Kyle Rittenhouse. That's most unfortunate. Again, I think at the end of the day, Kyle Rittenhouse was simply attempting to defend private property of the market town where his father lived and where he visited and where he basically had his life situated to a large degree. And he was doing this by putting out fires, and he was trying to defend his life against deadly mob violence, which is really a very American tradition, really. And the media's breathless coverage of this case has been full of misinformation and bias against gun owners, guns, stand your ground laws, castle doctrine, anything that's involving the Second Amendment or guns, the media has reported negatively on, which is what they always do. But this is just their most recent excuse and pretext for doing so in the context of the Rittenhouse case in Kenosha. Now, let's just take a couple examples of what I'm talking about. I mean, within hours of the shootings, video surfaced providing clear evidence, in my opinion, that Rittenhouse acted in self-defense, right? They showed a rioter chasing Rittenhouse into a parking lot and throwing something at him. They showed a mob chasing Rittenhouse down the street. They showed one assailant beating Rittenhouse with a skateboard, which, by the way, you can die, getting hit in the head with a skateboard. You saw another one pulling a gun on Rittenhouse, another one kicking him. But how much of this did you really hear about in the mainstream media? The answer is not very much at all, right? It wasn't consistent with the narrative, the anti-gun narrative that the media wanted to talk about. So instead, the media made Rittenhouse sound like a mass shooter on a rampage, which is the words of the Media Research Center when they were talking about this case. But in my view, the video evidence that all of you have probably already seen makes it pretty much clear that these suggestions that Rittenhouse was an active shooter was not true. He was very precise as to who he shot and when he shot and why he was shooting against people who, I don't think the jury found this out, but apparently all have, pretty serious criminal records, okay? Yet the media, again, reminder, much of whom is based in the coastal anti-gun cities of New York City and the anti-gun city of places like Los Angeles and San Francisco, they've really been conditioning this battlefield, the anti-gun, anti-Second Amendment, anti-Castle Doctrine, anti-stand your ground kind of battlefield for the anti-gun allies from day one of the Rittenhouse matter. And this is what they do. It's their modus operandi. And I think we've learned another critical lesson, that the media is simply not going to portray gun owners and the Second Amendment in a fair and honest and positive light, which is really what they should be doing. But that's never happened, and it's not happening now, and I doubt it will happen in the future. So let's wrap up. There you have it. 5 things we know right now, 5 lessons, if you will, that we know right now about the Kyle Rittenhouse case. Now, so thanks again for joining me here at the Four Boxes Diner, where we serve fresh, hot Second Amendment news and analysis. Now, I'm going to be back with another video as soon as the verdict comes in the Rittenhouse case. So check back here soon after the verdict comes down. But until then, we'll see you soon at Four Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.